Uh, Let me continue with Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales. And as we know, uh, this piece of work has been recognized as one of the best literary works written in the English language. But as you know, the language or the English language written in the Canterbury Tales is not the English language that we are using today. This is the what we call the Middle English, or the English being used during the 14th century. Actually, um, during the time of the Norman conquest, if you don't know the history, let me tell you that from the 11th to the roughly around the 15th century, about almost 400 years, England was under the conquest or the ruling of the French monarchy. We call them the French, the Norman French. And during that time, uh, the language of the nobility, I mean the courtier, the kings, the queens, or the princes, or the noble men and ladies, they were using French. So French was the language of nobility. At the same time, the language of scholars like academics like me myself was Latin. I mean, Latin uh, was the language of education across Europe anyway during that time. So this is the background that you need to understand. What I would like to point out is that the Middle English that Geoffrey Chaucer is using in the Canterbury Tales uh, can be said as the forefather of the English language that we are using today. That you know you are listening to me. I'm using the modern English, the English as being used by the people around the world. But back then, in the 14th century, this is the kind of the English language people over there in the UK were using, especially in and around London. Is the language of the commoners, of the lay people, ordinary people. It's not even the language of education. It's the language of, you know, ordinary people. You know one thing about, but how then the language of the commoners turn out to be the language of education, the language of the courtier, and nowadays the language of the world, which is English. Believe it or not, one of the reasons was the Black Death or the Great Pandemic during the 14th century. The Black Death, according to this book, wiped out almost half of adult population in and across Europe. Because of that, the social structure in many European states or cities, the social structure had changed. There was more room for ordinary folks to step up, move up to the ladder in the society. Ordinary people can, with education, could become good author, could move up the rank of the nobility, could become writer, could become churchman, or trade will flourish after that. And because of that, and because of uh, the Black Death, this is very important because English was the language of the commoners. When the lay people or the commoners had better opportunities in life, they brought with them their mother tongue or their own language. So the English language or the middle language has been uh, you know pushed up to the higher rank, higher use in the nobility, and later on is the language of the Bible, the language of the scholars. You may say that thanks to the pandemic during the 14th century. So there's a story of English and the pandemic, the great pandemic of the 14th century. You have to understand that the pandemic back then was so serious, is catastrophic. Catastrophic is mean is very deadly, is grave. Almost, according to this book, you don't have to trust me, just trust the book. Almost half of adult population were killed by the pandemic back then, and that changed a lot of things, including the uh, the fall of the Norman ruling of the UK in the 15th century, and the rise of the Middle English to the modern English as we know it today. So the Canterbury Tales are not just a collection of storytelling for the pilgrims in Canterbury, but it's also the language itself tells us a lot about the history of Europe, the history of the English language. And especially we are being locked down, we are under the spell of coronavirus today. We have to understand this. Pandemics occur every now and then throughout the history of mankind. And according to this book, The Canterbury Tales, bubonic or the Black Death really changed a lot of things. The social structure, the rise of Middle English. I'm Janpha Thadphoothon. Just to recap, okay, the Canterbury Tales was written by Geoffrey Chaucer. He lived between 1343 until the end of the 15th century or 1400. During that time, there were three languages in the UK at least. The Middle English being used by commoners, and because of the Black Death, the people have more opportunities to move upward. So the Middle English has become standard English later on, and the French, because it was England was conquered by the Norman. So the French was the language of nobility, but later on it has become the French, not the language of nobility anymore. And the Latin is the language of the scholars, throughout the history of Europe. So this is what you will learn when you read great book like the Canterbury Tales. And the plot itself is about people from different backgrounds, people from different places coming together, and each of them was, is telling a story, contributing a story is a storytelling. This is the great plot of the world. Many modern stories or novels actually follow this kind of plot, including Rashomon and the Midnight Restaurant by the Japanese and later on by the Chinese, and many other more. I'm Janpha Thadphoothon. I'm telling you the importance of the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer, the great, the father of the English literature actually. And we have learned that pandemic pandemics have been with us, and it has a role to play in the emergence of the English language as we know it today. I'm Janpha Thadphoothon, and this is my show. By the way, if you love me, you can subscribe to my channel, Janpha channel, and this is my show, English in the Garden. As you can see, I'm not in the garden. I'm in my library. Thank you for watching. See you in my next video.